All right, welcome to the continuation of the Tuesday, September 11th, Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 board meeting. The board has been in closed session since 6 p.m., talking about issues including employment of employee and probable or imminent litigation. We start out with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on the agenda is public comments. Nobody's given me any blue cards, so I'm going to assume there are no public comments. Unless somebody telling me otherwise. Nope. Then the next is superintendent communications. So, Mr. Pernot, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think the first item this evening, the board wanted to discuss board committee structure and outcomes and have a brief discussion this evening. Every committee was tasked with putting this on their last committee agenda to have a discussion between the administration and the board about the committee structure, the pros and cons, what the outcomes were for this past year. And so based on that discussion, the board wanted to have a full board discussion on what were the comments and what the conclusion is from the Board of Education related to the board committee structure that we put in place last year. So with that, I will turn it over to the board for your discussion.
Should we kind of have each committee chair just quickly summarize what was said in their committee about frequency and usefulness to the administration and what plan is moving forward? Well, why don't we just do it in geographical order here?
I guess that means me. I'm first. As chair of Performance Management Committee, we talked about it in general terms. We really talked about focusing on the priorities for the year and really just scheduling meetings around the most important topics. The things that we are focused on for the year is obviously the superintendent's performance evaluation and finalizing the superintendent's goals. And we've already laid out that process for the upcoming year, trying to plan out what the requirements are going to be for board meeting times next spring. So we're really trying to look ahead in advance and make sure that we're well prepared to finish the work, the key important work of doing the superintendent's performance evaluation. Really, there were just a couple of other items, and so really we felt as though we were staying on topic. We were staying on performance management tasks, and we were going to mock out or plan out what topics we were going to talk about for the rest of the year. We didn't quite get that pen to paper yet, but we felt the committee was working fine, and we were just going to stay focused on the key goals that had been teased out from the board retreat that we had done this past summer.
Mrs. Ebner?
Okay, I'll speak for the curriculum committee. We also thought that the committee was worth our time. We want to be careful about how much time our administrators spend preparing for committee meetings. We don't want it to be overburdensome. And a way we can get around that is we decided if the committee needs to make a recommendation, then we would need materials in advance from the administrators before the committee meeting. But if it's a topic that the administrator just wants to get an idea of, am I headed in the right direction, or what do you think of this idea, we don't need advanced materials, and it could be an easier way for the administrators to bring ideas forward and not have to feel like the process is so formalized. So that was one thing we talked about. Also, same as your committee, we have 4 priorities that we'll focus on for the year for the Curriculum and Instruction Committee. So if we don't need to meet for a certain month, then that's fine too. It doesn't have to be a monthly agenda. So overall, the committee structure is going well for curriculum and instruction.
All right, I'll speak to the Finance Committee. Similar comments to the prior two committees. I think one of the main things that came up too is being focused on items that are going to be presented at the board table anyway, particularly around budget, some of the things that have to be formally presented and not doing it twice. So I think that if there's not a reason why the administration is looking for feedback prior to going to the full board, then we can skip the committee and just go to the full board. Because I think that, again, the preparation time was starting to become significant. And then also a discussion around making sure that the agenda is relevant and that that there are items on that agenda that the administration wants feedback on, would like us to help them, whether it's pursuing towards a recommendation or whether it's just bouncing ideas off of it. Similar, Shannon, to you guys when we were talking about preparation materials in advance, in that, if we're being asked to recommend something to the full board, we do need to see it in advance, but by and large, beyond that, again, to reduce the preparation time because it was becoming significant. And so I think at the end of the day, I think the administration agreed that it was a benefit to have the committee structure, but that we agreed to make sure that we had meetings only when we had relevant things to discuss.
So I will represent the Board Improvement and Policy Committee, and we looked at it from both administration and board perspective, and we thought the structure was useful for both. Understand that there must be a policy committee, for school district compliance purposes. So we knew that, that committee would always have to be in place. So we really looked at it from board improvement. And from that standpoint, it really isn't administration presenting to us. It's really us doing some of our work and the legwork before, we bring things to the full board, because the sorts of things that we're trying to embark upon are new. And trying to look at what other districts are doing and what kind of best practices are. So we all felt as though this committee was extremely useful, not only because of school district compliance policy, as well as, we really want to model the continuous improvement that we're professing as a district for us as a board, and this is the way for us to do it. In that vein, what we said that what we learned in the first year is what works the best is that we kind of have a three-pronged approach. One is that we'll discuss a topic and get a bunch of ideas, right? I mean, there's issues that come to us as the Board Improvement Committee to kind of figure out how do we start doing this improvement that we think we need. And so we would discuss it. And then the second phase would be that we would draft a recommendation or a straw man that we can, really shoot holes in and ensure that we've gotten all the elements, and then present our recommendation to the board for full board approval. And I know that after every meeting, the next board, public board meeting, we talk about what we've discussed in the committees as well. So you kind of get a flavor of what we're discussing too. So we thought that was one way of getting all the work done, but also trying to communicate and look at, being transparent. One last thing that our committee said is we still have the committee policy 2150 that we would really like to finalize and get full board approval and go through first and second reading. So based on this discussion, we would like to be able to have our last discussion and add any other items that we need to of significance to our committee policy 2:150 and present it to the full board for approval. So that's what we talked about.
Thank you. I also sat in on all of those committee meetings, and at the risk of being redundant, my observations were that part of the purpose of a school board is to bring community values to the administration. And these committee meetings allow the school board to embed those community values at an even deeper level than previously. By participating with the administration's initial thoughts on subjects and allowing them to get the school board's input on what direction to go. The second common theme I heard was that want to make sure that these committee meetings are a good use of everyone's time. So, what I heard is those committees will feel free to cancel meetings if the meeting is not necessary, rather than meet every month for meeting's sake. And in the spirit of being useful or being conscious of everyone's time, the administration was feeling that they put a lot of effort into bringing materials, or I should say posting materials, long before the committee meeting was to take place. And that if they had ideas that they just wanted to walk through the committee for the first time at the meeting, that they agreed that posting those things way in advance was not absolutely necessary. But in those instances, the administration would bring plenty of hard paper copies for any community members that wanted to observe the meeting, so that everyone there would have a copy of what was being discussed at the meeting. And the other thing was the idea of not doing a presentation twice. There are, I think we discovered, there are some things that go on in committee meetings that might be more appropriate in front of the entire board. And it's up to the administration member and the committee chair to ferret those out and suggest that if the administrator need not do it twice, that he just bring it to the full board. That's all I had to add. Mrs. Hirsch?
Mr. Collins, your last comment reminds me that one of the other conversations I think we had, and I think it was in curriculum, was it part of the role of the committee as well as we prepare to bring a topic to the full board, there are clearly, between the budget, between student achievement numbers that we're going to be seeing, there was an effort or a discussion around having the committee provide feedback to the administration to make sure that we touch in the full presentation, we're touching what it is that the board feels as though we need to see. So giving advice and guidance in preparation for, not necessarily going through the whole budget or going through the achievement reports, but really kind of almost planning a workshop type meeting on a major topic and giving the administration guidance on what the board thinks is relevant and almost preparing the administration so that we can have great discussion about the particular topic. So I think that was one of the things that we had talked about as well.
Again, I think that's a valid point, and we'll leave that to the discussion between the committee chair and the administration member. Sorry, Mrs. Taroni. Go ahead.
It's no secret to any of you that I was dragged kicking and screaming into this committee structure. So I just have a couple of comments about it. One of our goals, maybe in my memory, the key goal of using a committee structure last year was to get 4 new board members up to snuff, up to speed, if you will, in district business, district workings, help them to know quickly the different departments, different branches of the district. And I think we met that goal. At least the 4 new board members in 2 areas anyway are really well-versed in those areas, the committees they were on. Maybe not so much in the other 2 areas where they weren't working as closely. So I think we met that. I think we have to think about what are our goals for committees as we go forward. That was at least one goal last year, and it was partially met. We also heard from, at least in the committees that I was in, one committee, the Finance Committee, that the administrator had some concerns about repeating things, and you've addressed that a little bit here. Doing work twice, making it seem like it was a mini board meeting, that was a negative on the part of one administrator. None of the chairs have talked to how it's working for our public. And we've heard on several occasions that at least 3 of really invested public members, in their opinions, committee structure is not working for them. They feel like they come to regular board meetings twice a month and they're milquetoast compared to what they used to be. They're not getting the meat of what's going on in the district, and they don't feel prepared to invest 6 nights a month seeing what's going on in the district. And in fact, the meat of the work of the district when it comes to the board is happening in committee now. Whether that's going to change based on our analysis, I don't know, but that is the impression of at least 3 people in our public who are really, really invested. They come all the time, they want to know, and perhaps they want to encourage others to run for the board, but they're thinking about this time commitment, what it would take. I think they see it as a negative. One of the other things that concerns me is for years, we talked about, past years, talked about getting our board meetings on cable TV. Great. Transparent. We finally did it. We got to it. And I feel like now that the work of the board is taking place in committees that are not televised, we've really taken a step backwards in terms of transparency with engaging with our community, transparency. What we talk about is something that they get to hear, whether they come here on a Tuesday night or whether they flip it on Thursday afternoons or tape it or whatever. It was much easier for the community to see the actual work of the board. Right now, with none of the committee meetings being televised, they're not getting that anymore, and I see that as a real step backwards. I also see that our School Board Association has told us on repeated occasions that the only true board work takes place in the Policy Committee and in the Superintendent Evaluation Committee, and perhaps a Board Improvement Committee. Like you said, Karen, most of your work on your committee is not involving administrators. It's what does the board want to do to improve themselves? That, to me, is a valuable reason for having a committee. How can we be a better board? How can we relate to our community better? But the other areas really encourage micromanagement of board members, which is something that at least the School Board Association and I personally think we have to guard against. At the very least, in order to, if we set similar goals for next year, which is to bring new board members up to speed, get all board members educated in what goes on in the district, we should at least shuffle up the members for next year so that board members who were serving on 2 committees before serve on 2 different committees for next year, so they too learn about other aspects of the district, if that, in fact, is one of our goals. But we haven't talked about what goals of the committee would be for next year, and I think that's a conversation we need to have.
And what do you think the most appropriate time frame? When do you think we should have that discussion about goals for the committees for next year?
Well, if we're going to change seats on committees, it should happen fairly quickly, I would think. I mean, perhaps the board wants to keep the same goals. I don't know. We just haven't talked about it. We've talked now to the administration in each of the committees, and we've heard how the committees are or are not working for them, and we're going to try and make adjustments to meet those needs, but I think we have to be careful about meeting our needs and the needs of our public as well. So the sooner the better. I don't know if there's time for it tonight or if we need to put it on another agenda, but committees for the sake of committees, to me, doesn't get it. Let's be purposeful about why we're doing it.
Mrs. Hirsch and then Mrs. Stufen.
Yeah, Susan, I agree with you in terms of the concerns of transparency, and I think that's why we've had the conversations about, I know in curriculum, I know we've talked about it, is when we present the results of our wonderful students, we want to do that at the full board table. We want that to be televised. We would love to have a large audience present to hear about the progress of our students and what our goals are for them and how we're moving towards them. And so the topic in the committee was to prepare for that meeting, to give advice. And I think we've had conversations around each committee. What are the big topics? What are the big things that we need to make sure that the full board is having a good discussion around, and not discuss them in committee do the background prep work to make sure that when we do discuss them, that we're communicating what it is that we want to communicate. So I feel as though much of the work starting now, moving forward, that those types of discussions aren't going to happen, at least in the committees that I sit on. That was my understanding. And that we would be bringing those discussions to the good old-fashioned workshop sessions that we had talked about and trying to slot those so that everybody knows that in the fall, in October or the end of September is when we talk about student achievement. And we start creating almost rituals around those things. We know that we're going to see how our kids did last year. It's going to be a big meeting. And so, I mean, I think we were moving away from having those discussions in committee and making sure and being more intentional with the planning of our meetings throughout the year. At least that was my take, and maybe I was off.
Mrs. Steuven?
Okay. I completely agree with you, Susan, and our committee, and I forgot to talk about that, is we really did highlight that we have heard from at least two very dedicated, very long-term board meeting participants, that they felt as though they didn't understand the process as well with a committee structure. One thing that we said is that we as a full board are trying to communicate more about everything. I mean, bigger picture to what's going on, financially with us, even engaging with legislators, so it's top, all the way down to what we do. And as we do that, we are communicating more to everyone, the annual report, the budget at a glance, meeting with our users for facility rentals. So what we said is the first year, it was absolutely about education for at least half of the board that was new. The way that how we looked at it was we learned an awful lot, even outside of board improvement and policy, about what the work of the board is. And there are some things that as each committee looked at having an annual committee calendar so that everyone knew what was some of the background data for trending and those sorts of things that you'd want to do up front as you start looking at some of the things that are presented to us for major decisions. Things like DPIs and student achievement and Common Core standards and curriculum review cycle and, budgeting so that we're looking at the budget early, not, last minute for cuts, and engaging the community and how do we do all that and where do we fit and what are some of the, background, like the detail things that you do before you, talk about it with everybody. Budget cost cutting. I know that those are a lot of the things that came to finance this year. And I think that those are all really good things that we are doing more thoughtfully. And so I saw us transition from the first year of not really knowing to let's do the legwork up front and do some of the roll up the sleeves. What sorts of things do we need to make sure that we highlight? And we do even more background information or, have the administration provide a different perspective that's more helpful, if you will, to be more thoughtful and long-term looking, that we could do that this year. That's how we saw it. And that's how I personally saw us move from the first year to the second year. Beyond that, I don't know.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I believe that the positives outweigh these negatives that you're discussing. For instance, in curriculum and instruction, the administrators prefer to have a committee. It helps them guide their work. It helps them do their job. Secondly, we have so much work to do that I feel like we're servicing the community better, because when I get complaints from the community saying, well, the science curriculum at the middle school, what are you doing about that? Well, we're moving along at a faster clip because we can get through some of these discussion topics. We can dive deeper into some of the problems. We can come up with very, very thoughtful recommendations for the full board and move at a faster clip than we have in past years with committees. I feel like we are dividing and conquering and servicing the community by moving along. And also, for example, I'll be talking about it later, our English learner program, we can help frame the discussion for the full board to have a really robust discussion at the full board table. And I don't know if we would have as effective of a conversation if we didn't have that committee in place, that we can do some better preparation and really inform the community on the direction of our English learner program. Those are my thoughts.
If I can add a few thoughts too. This is my roughly halfway into my fourth year on the school board. And the first 2 years, my experience with everything, with no committees, everything being brought to the board. And on Mrs. Stufen's theme of thoughtfulness, I have to say that I found myself, one, because I was new, but two, because many of these topics had not been brought up or discussed before they were brought up to the full board at the meeting. A decision was made, and we moved on. And no matter how much I thought about and did research on those topics before the board meeting, because of the board discussion, the next day something would hit me, and I would think, wow, why didn't I bring this up? Or, wow, I just thought of that. Whereas I think the committee structure allows us to visit many of these topics well in advance of it ever coming to the full board. And for board members to be able to completely think the issue through, and to have time to have that thoughtful discussion with the administrator or with each other at the board table, things that maybe we wouldn't have thought about. And I'll give you an example. Well, the second thing is there's only so much time at a board meeting, and talk about productiveness at a board meeting. My observation is that past 9 o'clock productiveness falls off. We've been in closed session since 6 o'clock, so that'll be the 3-hour mark of the meeting. At 10 o'clock, I think productivity starts to hit a parabolic downward slope. And I've attended plenty of board meetings that have reached midnight or close to it, at which point I didn't feel productive at all. And this allows us to discuss things without going into those late hours of the night. And I realize that the trade-off for this is some of this transparency, that there's no camera there, that many observers don't want to put in the number of hours that would be required to attend every single board meeting and every single committee meeting. But I've also observed some very good things that have happened, because there are many topics that there's just not enough time to bring to the full board. And I'll give you one example out of the Finance Committee. And because there was a committee, because there was enough time to delve into this kind of detail, one of the things that was brought to the committee was the board's option. And this had never, in my 3.5 years on the board, never been brought to the board before, but the board's option to contest a property reassessment or a property tax challenge by, the applicable case is a large commercial enterprise that's challenging either their assessment or their property taxes, and that the board had the option to actually challenge that. I think our previous administration, the hospital, for instance, applied for that at least 2 years ago. And the previous administration never brought that to the full board, probably thinking there wasn't time. Well, now, this year, it became a surprise to us that our revenues are likely to take a $950,000 hit because of that property tax challenge and the reclassification of that institution to nonprofit. And it's caught us by surprise. Had we had committees previously, maybe we would have known about that. But certainly, with the things the Finance Committee now put in place, in the future we will know about that, because that is being monitored now, and it will be brought to the Finance Committee and therefore the full board's attention. So that's one area where I think the committee structure served the community very, very well. And so, I mean, those are my thoughts on committees. I think the benefits outweigh the disadvantages, but there are certainly things on both sides of the column.
Sure, I mean, I'll throw my 2 cents in. I mean, I know we're not perfect. This is the first year we did this. You know, I hear the points about micromanagement and whatnot, and maybe we've jumped over and back across that line between board work and staff work a few times, but we're getting our legs calibrated here. You know, and I agree. The difficulty is to balance the greater, I think, the greater productivity that we have as an organization with the transparency issue. But I think at the end of the day, to Shannon's point, you know, this is all in support of service to the community and doing the community's work and delivering value to the community. And so there are those trade-offs which I think we have to deal with. But you know, I also think that. I disagree with the meat of the board work as being done at the committee. I just fundamentally disagree with that point. I think that we as a committee need to be asking questions or need to be there so the board, and I think that when we've had these discussions, so that the administration can come to us and ask questions like, am I on the right track? Am I going down the right road? What am I missing? Can I get feedback before I go to the entire board? You know, what do you think the reaction is the way I'm presenting this? I mean, it's not decision-making, it's coaching. It's an opportunity to, would this be something the entire board, Jim's point exactly with the property appeals, would this be something the entire board would be interested in discussing? And that bubbled up to the entire board because of that. So, I mean, I think we need to definitely maintain focus on answering those types of questions and making sure that we're not doing the meat of the board work in these committees. But, you know, I think what I heard when we had these discussions, and again, anybody on the administration, correct me if you feel differently, but that it is a resource and it's productive and it's helpful, and that while we do need to keep working on refining it, it's something that's valuable to all of us.
Mrs. Hirsch.
I think there have been some discussions, and maybe they're not quite as explicitly stated here, but I think that there were intentions to post the annual work plan for the committees, so that in this season, if you will, we intend to talk about the superintendent's evaluation and how we're planning for that. And I used the example earlier of the curriculum and the student assessment. So, you know, whether it's preparatory work before, you know, I believe it was our intention on performance management and curriculum to post, these are the topics for the year, and then we'll slot those into meetings. And so I think from a transparency standpoint, if there's something that you're really interested in terms of English language learners, here's a series of meetings where we're going to be focused on that particular topic, and that would be exposed and available, and not like, you know, here's a list of 100 meetings. Come, sit with the board for hours on end to get to the topic that you're interested in. So I think we, you know, the committee chairs have a responsibility, you know, whether it's through our reports as we come to the full board and say, here's the schedule for the year, this is when we intend to talk about this particular topic. I think that's one way that we could take more initiative to make our committee agendas more transparent.
Anything else, Mrs. Deroni?
Sorry if you haven't been able to hear. I've had this on the whole time. Sorry. So what I'm hearing from you as goals for committees in the future are to be able to plan full board meetings, regular board meetings in advance. Yes, that's one goal. To get topics somehow vetted before they come to the full board, to have longer discussions about topics than we're able to have at a full board meeting, and to somehow coach the administration. I'm a little vague on the coaching of the administration piece, but I guess we should probably put together for the policy committee some goals for these committees so that they can craft a policy for us that states how we're going to use committees, since the current policy is incorrect. It only, has one committee in it, or I don't know. So I guess we would need to
nail down what these goals are for us. And I would really like to include the invisible partner, our public, in some of those goals.
This request that we put it into policy, I think, is a reasonable request. How do we want to go about procedurally doing that?
The first question that I have is, if you look at any one of our policies, they're not year-to-year goals, okay? Our policy, it came to second reading and then was kicked back because we're ending the school year and we wanted to revisit, or were asked to revisit the committee structure, and were they valuable and useful and effective for not only board members, but for the administration and the public. I really have a concern in putting annual goals in a policy because I don't see that. And we can have them as a board, but not in policy. I mean, we have guidelines around all of our committees in the policy as it was presented to the board originally. So I would like to know if we think that annual goals for committees is appropriate for policy. Where is it stated that we would do that? I understand that it's really good practice, and that's what we'd want to do as a board, but not in policy.
I agree. The annual goals, as stated as such, and it is how I stated it, is not really what I meant. But if you're going to change the policy, we need to have some reason, some idea why we want committees. We have to state in that policy the purpose they're serving. Why have them? You know, there are two prescribed. We need a policy committee. And we also need to evaluate the superintendent. I mean, the only committee we absolutely have to have is the policy committee. Why are we having the others? Just some kind of overarching statement, if not specific reasons. But I also want us to be clear on what those reasons are, because it's a lot of work for the people we're paying. It's a lot of work. And if it meets their needs, great. I just think a couple of statements as to why we're continuing this would be a healthy thing to have in our manual.
Mrs. Hirsch?
Maybe each of the chairs could work and come up with a statement about the individual committee. We have 4 standing committees right now, and if each of the chairs could come up with the purpose of the committee, and, you know, we can craft it, and we can work with Mrs. Stufen individually so that we have some consistency across what it is that we're trying to accomplish. That would be a good starting point.
And do we think that 4 is the right number still? It was last year. Is it this year? Is it too much for the administration? Is it not enough? Do you need a personnel committee? Do you need a, sorry. Do we need a special ed committee? Do we need there's a couple of people, couple things we don't cover.
We claim Brad in performance management. He's got a committee.
And the other thing is, should we shuffle up our members? Are we not worried about training board members anymore?
Well, I think I'm sorry, Mrs. Ebner, go ahead. You can.
I think we're going to say the same thing.
All right.
Didn't we agree
Go
that
ahead.
we would do 2 years? We're into our second year now, so it would be the end of next April.
Yeah, I thought we were.
We would reshuffle, so in April 2013. So
I agree. We did have that discussion a few months ago and said that the best thing to do is keep the members, the present members on the present committees, with the exception that Susan, you substituted in my 2 places, just for, because 4 board members were new last year, just for continuity's sake. That's the word I was looking for. And that it would make sense to shuffle the members of the committee after every election cycle. And I thought that's what we agreed upon. Now, there'll be certainly be a new board next May, and they may have a different opinion as to how often they would like to shuffle committee members, and that, of course, would be up to that new board. But I think if each chair worked with Mrs. Stufen, I think we heard a lot of the same themes. If each chair worked with Mrs. Stufen, and maybe the policy committee could draft first maybe kind of a philosophical statement about why the committees are there, and then a briefer statement as to what the committees are and why they exist. And I believe each of those committees did have that discussion with their administrator, their counterpart administrator, about whether that committee should exist, and they all agreed that they should. Although I did not, in any of those discussions, sense any sentiment for more committees. The sentiment seemed to be that we had the right number. And none of the administrators wanted to eliminate their committee. They all found value in them, but each had a suggestion on perhaps how to do things differently to make the best use of everyone's time. So should we move forward in that direction? Does that everybody agree that maybe the committee chairs get together with Mrs. Stoof and kind of create some bullet points for the philosophical statement, and then each committee chair can take a stab at why their committee exists, what its, I won't say, certainly not yearly goals, but overarching goals of why the committee exists, and have the policy committee take a stab at putting that in writing as a policy we can discuss.
Or do we want to leave our policy general with just the committees that we're required to do by law, and then each board, without having to change policy, can do whatever committees they want? Maybe some year we only want to plan the full board meeting committee. And they deal in things in each of the areas, including special ed, including personnel, and whatever. I mean, that takes it to the other end of the continuum.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the first time that we talked about committees. And what we said was, we said, should we do committees? We all agreed we'd do committees. We all said that let's review them after the first year. We reviewed them after the first year. We said, we think that 1 year is not enough for board members to really understand that area. And for us to get the committee structure in line, so we're going to do it 2 years. We said that our policy was supposed to be around policy in governing the committees, and that after each year, if we had to review these philosophical vision, mission, value, those sorts of things, assignment changes, just like the school liaison program, that we could talk about that as a board. And to me, that would mirror the governance model that exists for governance and school board governance, from what I'm aware of.
So how would we like to move forward?
So all I'm saying is I guess my take is I really want to have policy remain policy. And if I have to go to someone in IASB or whomever to say, and look at other districts to see if they have committees, how they work their policy, I would like to be consistent with the way that it should be done. And if these things that you have to revisit, like everything else that we do in governance and in administrating and leading a governmental entity, that you have almost guidelines, like we chose for the school board, school liaison program and every other thing that we have. That would be my proposal.
So would you like to take a look at other school districts' policies, what they look like in regard to committees?
Yeah, so bottom line, to recap the whole conversation, I think that it is okay for us to have a full board discussion like we continue to have. For the committee chairs to work with me, the policy committee chair, on any particular purpose from your committee, and then we can articulate that. At the same time, from a policy standpoint, the policy committee can look at how do other districts and how does school board governance best practices work with committees within their policy, and then there's adjunct things, okay? Does that make sense? Is that comprehensive?
Fine. We'll move forward then. All right. The next topic is the six-day enrollment numbers. Mr. Purnell.
Yes, you have in your packet this evening our six-day enrollment numbers for 2012, 2013. What I'd like to draw the attention to is always the comparison between last year's enrollment figures and this year's enrollment figures. Overall, the difference is that we are up 58 students as compared to last year on our six-day enrollment. It's interesting to note that the elementary schools had a positive growth of 76 students. 30 of those are in the early childhood program. So the early childhood program, along with Fisher, are the two fastest growing schools in the district. The rest of the buildings have up and down growth, but overall, 76 plus students at the elementary school. Interestingly, the middle schools are down 61 students this year. Down 61 students this year. I'm sorry, down 48 students, 61 of which occurred at Sandburg. Now, part of that was a big 8th grade class at Sandburg that moved to the high school and a smaller 6th grade class that came in. So that was kind of predictable that that would happen, and indeed it did, and they are down 61 students from class to class. York is up 30 students, and so overall, we are up 58 students. The other thing to note is if you look at the Cassandra information, the predictions that we had from Cassandra, and we had Cassarda, I'm sorry, and as we talked about this year, we had talked about doing another study to refine these numbers, that the numbers were getting old, the predictions may be not as valid. Well, as a matter of fact, if you look, they are almost right on target. And so I think it, once again, validates that study. Cassarda seems to be still tracking and still being a good predictor of what our overall enrollment's going to be. If you look at the total, their B formula is the middle one, the predictable one that they think is probably more likely, and it's just slightly above B at 8204, we're at 8288. So that's a pretty good predictor of where we are. So again, I don't think we need to spend funding on another study right at this time. We can continue to track, and this continues to be a good predictor. So with that, I don't know if the board has any other specific questions about enrollment.
Mrs. Hirsch.
I just have a couple observations to make. The Cassarda data, actually the B numbers, those middle-of-the-road numbers, we're really assuming that the economy stayed pretty much the same, that our financials, everything stays pretty much the same. And if you think about what's happened in the last 5 years, we've had a significant downturn, and yet our numbers are still ahead of where we thought we would be. The A numbers are the numbers that we expected if there was a financial downturn, and really enrollment would be dropping off. So we're right on the middle of the road, those B numbers. But if you think about what we've done, what has happened in our economy, I think it's, again, proving out that we have a very solid school district that is very attractive to families, that maybe it's not so much new housing that's been coming up, although there's been a recent recurrence of new housing, at least in my neighborhood, but whether it's renters or whatever. But we still are continuing to grow every year in our enrollment, which means that we have more students that we need to service. And again, I agree, Mr. Purnell, when you look at where the growth is occurring, our growth is occurring, the early childhood is well above C. We've got, we're blowing out in the early childhood students, and we're still ahead, 76 students for this year, it looks like, at the elementary level. So we still have young children and young families moving in that are requiring the services of our schools. The one question I did have is capacity. Because of Fisher's numbers, they added 34 students this year. How are they on classroom space and on facility space? Are we in trouble yet there, or how are we
We are
doing?
still okay there. So the facility still is able to take students. I think it is, in the future, something we'll need to look at Fisher, because if they continue to grow at this rate, that will be an issue. And so in the next 2 or 3 years, we may have to look at some solution to Fisher if that enrollment trend continues at that building. And I think this is the second year in a row they've had significant growth.
I guess maybe a request, I know that we're looking at doing some facilities assessments, but if there is some way that we can incorporate either whether it's historical data in terms of student population or what we think we anticipate the capacity of a building could be. Not that there would ever be a hard limit, but if we are getting close on a particular facility, I think that might be something that is worth monitoring.
Mrs. Steuven?
Thank you. I was thinking the same thing along the lines for early childhood, because that seems to be significant, and I wondered what the trend is for early childhood. I mean, isn't it? But what are the implications? I guess that's, so they're.
What is the
continuously-
capacity of Madison? Sorry.
I think they have 2 to 3 open classrooms, that's about it. And those open classrooms are already being used. We would just have to get more creative about how we were going to use them if we were using them as actual classrooms.
Mrs. Deroni?
Do we know the percentage of the 184 who we could predict will actually end up in our kindergartens? Because don't some of those children go off to private schools or go into other kinds of placement, or is it
Are
pretty
you
much?
saying students from Madison? Mm-hmm. 90% of the kids that we have at Madison do stay with us here in
90.
Elmhurst because they are transferring into our kindergartens with an IEP. And the IEPs cannot be met at the private parochials in Elmhurst.
So only 10% will not, only 18 of those students on average are not going to end up in our schools.
Correct.
Mrs. Ebner?
When does the CASARTA projection, does that project end?
I believe we have 3 more years, I believe. I think it's 16 is the last prediction, so at that point, we would have to have a new study done. But I think we've got 2 to 3 more years.
And what is the capacity of York High School? Are we anywhere close to bumping up against that?
There's 2 issues with the capacity of York. It goes back to, for example, Madison, how you utilize the space and how you utilize the classrooms. I'm not sure, I am not familiar with what the quoted capacity was when they built that facility. So I'd have to go back and look at, there's a calculation they use. But in my experience, high schools can always have greater capacity than the architects design it, because they design lots of unassigned space, half classrooms, other space in the high school that you can turn into classrooms pretty readily. I will say that in talking with the administration just a couple of weeks ago, we have used up most of the lockers at York. And so one of the big things right now is we may have to look at it installing additional lockers somewhere or having kids share lockers in the future. So we're going to be looking at that for next year if this enrollment continues. We do have space on the 3rd floor academic wing to put in lockers, so that might be an option we look at. But we're going to look at our projections again, see what the projection is for York, and go from there.
Mrs. Deroni?
I think our quoted capacity when York was built was like 2,500. So I'm not surprised that we're out of lockers.
Yeah.
Am I understanding there is some unfinished space in the top floor of the tower that could possibly be remodeled, or is that an urban legend?
No, there is a space. We'll call it a space. I have not been there. Dr. Johns, do you want to comment on it?
Calling it unfinished would be probably rating it higher than it really is. It's very raw space. It needs a great deal of work.
But it is space.
There's quite a bit of space up there. You're right. The entire 3rd floor as you walk up on the front of the building. It's a huge space.
Okay, all right, so there's space. There's just sounds like there's a few dollar signs in front of that if you want to use it. Good to know. Anything else on 6-day enrollment? Moving on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have the board receive the 2005 annual report. Malia and her staff, communication staff, along with a lot of staff members, really spent a lot of time putting this together. And I think it's a great document for the district. It's mailed out. It's our major communication with our community. And so I'm going to turn this over to Malia, and she can go through the highlights of just a really outstanding communication piece.
Well, thank you very much. We're always thrilled when this is in the mail, which it is this week. So hopefully this will be coming to a mailbox near you soon. And as Mr. Pernod said, it is the one piece that we mail out annually. So I feel strongly that we have an obligation to communicate with our stakeholders, and we think that this is a nice, handy overview of the district. It has a longer shelf life than a lot of publications do because people do refer to it again and again because it does summarize nicely not only our student performance, some of our facility issues, certainly our financial challenges, and a lot of other sort of interesting details that people would like to know. I just wanted to report also that, again, this year, we were able to produce this at a very nominal fee. We did produce 22,000 pieces, and including all production costs, design and printing, and also mailing, these actually come out to 53 cents each. So I think that's a valuable investment in our community to put this information in the hands of every stakeholder at the price of 53 cents. So I just want to thank everybody who helped with the production of this, and as I said, we're very thrilled that it's off the press. We recently found out that last year's edition, which was very similar in format, won an award from the Illinois chapter of the National School Public Relations Association, so we're excited about that too. Any questions?
Mrs. Hirsch?
The thing I like about the annual report is that I know, Ms. Smith, you sit through all of our board meetings, and you get to listen to us, and you don't often get to speak, but it's really rewarding to see that how we're presenting student performance, the ways that we're all starting to talk using the same language in terms of what we're trying to achieve for our students. And when I flipped through the report, it did come to my house in the mail today. We're looking at the EPAS growth and what we're trying to accomplish, which is what we are talking about in curriculum committee and preparing to bring to the full board. And we've been talking about all year how we're going to look at our student growth. And when we look at the ACT composite and what we're trying to do in terms of setting goals, and I really like the way that we're showing ISAT above growth and not focusing on the meets and exceeds numbers that we don't always think are the most relevant way to look at things. So I appreciate that we are presenting to the community the results of the hard work that our whole team, leading off with our teachers, are working on, and it's in the way that we're trying to move the district forward. So thank you.
If I can add one comment, and I've said this every year since Malia Smith has been here, but again, congratulations on a publication that is a vast improvement over what we had to communicate with our taxpayers before you got here. So thank you very much. This is a great piece, and thank you for your guidance in representing us to our constituents and our taxpayers and the people that pay the bill for the school district. Thank you very much. Mr. Bloom.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo that. I mean, thank you very much. When I read through this, I went, holy cow, she managed to distill a whole year's worth of stuff into one document here. I mean, and it hit all the high points. I mean, and we did a lot of stuff this year, and the ability to distill that and to put those bullets in there, and you touched on a lot of the major things that we're working on, and you actually made us sound very intelligent. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And Mrs. Evner.
Thanks, too. As we start mapping out community engagement, we're ramping up our community engagement and talking about the different groups that we want to reach, realtors, the seniors, different groups that we're trying to talk to. This is, I just grabbed this and I'm ready, I'm ready to go. So thanks. I don't have to get a lot of documents together, and people really like this.
Thank you. We have found it useful even for new teachers at job fairs. We're finding more and more uses for this document, which I'm thrilled about. And I just want to mention, too, it's also on the website, and our web version has links throughout the document so that people can click on something and it will take them to even more detailed information on a certain topic. So I think a lot of people that are web savvy are going to enjoy that piece of it.
Thank you.
I just want to add one more item that isn't on the agenda tonight, but we are proud to announce, and it has been in a press release, that two of our schools in Elmhurst have been awarded by the U.S. Department of Education as National Blue Ribbon Schools. And that is a significant accomplishment for a school, and I think it's indicative of the kind of work that goes on in all of our schools in Elmhurst. But it's always great to be recognized and rewarded for excellence in public education. And especially in these terms, Illinois had 21 schools that received National Blue Ribbon. Out of the 21, 13 were public schools. And out of those 13, 2 of them are Elmhurst. I think that just says volumes about the dedication of all of our staff, our employees, the expectation of the parents in this district, and that there's something good going on in Elmhurst on a daily basis. And I think this is just one example or 2 examples of the great work that goes on. And so congratulations to Brian and to Lincoln, both schools, great job. We will have them back in November. They're going to Washington in November to receive their awards, and it's always exciting. I was there a long time ago as a National Exemplary Principal, and I can tell you, you never forget the experience of being invited to Washington by the President to have that honor. So we will honor them at a future board meeting in November. So congratulations to both those schools.
Next on our agenda is the board committee reports. Let's start with board improvement and policy.
All right, I'm not going to repeat anything that we talked about with regard to committee structure, okay? 2 things that we reviewed, policy and board improvement. First, I'll hit policy. We reviewed policy 760 on residents. It's really in relation to the new homeowners who have not yet moved into their homes at the beginning of the start of the year, but they want to enroll their children in our school district so that they don't have to change their students mid-year. So we looked at other districts and what their policy was and matched it up with previous policies that we've had and current policy. And we wanted to model the policy that allows for refunds to residents for tuition payments once they establish residency within 90 days. And we are going to be bringing that policy to the board for first reading. Second, policy 7300, extracurricular athletics. It actually should be extracurricular activities. We visited this for the 3rd request from the board, 3rd time the board requesting us to look at this. And this time Dave had brought not only the present athletic philosophy that the York administration had put together, but also we looked at the draft or the York student handbook and what their philosophy statement was. And what we're going to be doing is the committee's going to look at consolidating the language and really kind of clarifying the intent of what we want with regard to extracurricular activities, just being an adjunct to our educational philosophy. Kind of that's how we're approaching it. So we just wanted to tell you that's kind of how we're approaching it. Policy 420, fund balance. We were asked by the Finance and Operations Committee to review our fund balance policy. It presently states 25% minimum fund, and we were asked to discuss raising it to 26% effective July 1 of the fiscal year. And so we'll be bringing that policy back to the full board for a first reading. Policy 6240, field trips and class trips. It was really a minor change as to why this policy came to the committee, and it was to include language on fee waivers. But it's noted that since the Board Improvement and Policy Committee met, that there are other issues related to this policy that have arisen, and therefore we're going to be asked to look at it again. And we meet the 27th of this month. So moving on from policy to board improvement. Oh, sure. Can we do policy and then board improvement questions?
Sure.
I'm sorry, could you go back to the residency and explain? I didn't understand, and I didn't have time to read the minutes. I'm not sure I understand the 90 days. If you could explain a little bit more about what it is that you're expecting to propose?
Yeah, let's see. Currently, we say that there's no, that we don't give any, and correct me if I misstate this, Dave, but the way that our current policy reads is that we don't have any allowance for people that want to enroll their students here with all of the legal documents saying that they're building a home or they're moving in within the school year. And so we looked at other districts, and they have policy that says they allow a 90-day window, and so we are going to recommend that we do the same.
Our current policy states that you must provide proof of residency in our district in order for you to register your child for school in our district. And our past practice has been that if you do not reside within our district, then you are charged tuition for your student to attend school. So you're saying you're looking to change that? I'm not sure I understand
there's a
where
caveat,
and
right.
when, and I need to know a little bit more about that.
Here's the caveat. What your policy presently states is what you said, that right now, with this caveat, the only way somebody can pay tuition to the district to get their child enrolled is if they give us proof that they are going to be moving into the district in the current school year. So otherwise, there's no tuition payment. We do not accept tuition payments in Rochester. But if you are going and you come in and say, in October, my house is going to be completed, we are planning on moving in, we say, okay, but you have to pay tuition on a daily basis up until the point that you take residency on that home. It's non-refundable. So they are paying tuition even though they will be future residents of Elmhurst 205. When we looked at this, the purpose seemed to be that we wanted to make sure that those parents had every intention of moving into the district, that they were actually going to reside there, they weren't going to rent it, all of those issues. We had some parents this year come to us and say, we feel that's a little unfair. We have every intention. Isn't there something else we can do? Because the burden of having 3 kids paying tuition on a daily basis is very, very expensive for us, and we have every intention of moving in. What can we do? So we looked at a variety of policies, and what a lot of districts have done is say, you will pay tuition, you have to show us residency, but at the point that you move in, within 90 days of the start of the school year, and you show us that you are now residing at that home that you said you were going to, we will reimburse your tuition back to us, back to you. And so it seems to fulfill the purpose that the board originally had, was to make sure that people who intend to move really do move, that they do become residents of Elmhurst, but there's not a tuition penalty because you're building a home in Elmhurst and you have to wait. And it's a tough decision for some of the parents because they want their child to start in Elmhurst. They have every intention of moving in, but let's say your home is not completed until the end of September. Your child would have to enroll in another district and then do that transfer in the end of September, October. A lot of parents are willing to pay the tuition up front, but would like to consider a reimbursement. So that is what's going to be considered by the full board at the first reading of the policy.
Just one other question. You said 90 days from the start of the school year. Our school year is about 180 days. You're saying 90 calendar days, not school days.
Oh, it would be school days. It would be first semester. The intention right now is if they move within the first semester, they would get a tuition reimbursement. If they move after that, there's no tuition reimbursement.
Just some initial feedback. I think that we've had a past practice, and I'm not sure that I'm interested in diverting from that. Obviously, we need to have full board discussion on that, but that's a dramatic shift for us.
Why don't we save that discussion for when the policy is presented to the board?
I was just going to say, this is an example of, there's been some comments that were not transparent. The decisions are being made outside of that the committees are making decisions. That is not the case, and this is a perfect example. We talked about this in committee. It's going back to the full board for discussion. It's going to be for first reading. So I just want to be clear that every decision that's being made is being made in public that affect the school district, and we have been very watchful of that. So this is just another example of that.
So in other words, we'll talk about it more.
Right.
Okay, board improvement. We reviewed the self-evaluation next steps, and we identified two perspectives. One is it the full board item to work, or is it a specific committee item to work? And we're moving forward on the self-evaluation next steps. A lot of them are already slotted. Most of them are in board improvement, and most of them are slotted in our annual calendar that we also talked about at this meeting. Legislative engagement by the board. Actually, we're going to talk at board communications about the goals of the goals of our legislative engagement. I know that I had talked about our plan last time I did a readout from our committee, but what we had said in our committee is that we wanted the full board to have an opportunity to provide input and feedback into what should our goals be as we solidify how are we going to engage our legislators. So we'll talk about that in board communications. Engagement of the board and community, we talked about it from two perspectives. One is just overall, the committee discussed the desire to keep a list of resolutions to community issues so that we understand what the resolutions are. And secondly, we talked about the community forum. The community forum is originally set up for usually, the first Tuesday of November. It happens to be election day, so I'm sorry that I didn't look at what the new date is. I think it's the following day. The Monday. It's November 5th will be the community forum. And what we discussed is potentially changing the format slightly. And the board presenting specific topics that we'd have two things that we'd look at. One is our standard, the community can talk to us about anything. But secondly, are there some key topics that we would like to open up and get feedback on? And we would publish those in advance so that people would be able to provide feedback on. Committee structure, is an example, so that we really provide a forum for the public. And we actually utilize the public forums that we have for those purposes. Annual calendar, I think I beat that one to death. Board improvement update, the school liaison program, we're just doing a little bit of tweaks to the guidelines that the board had saw and provided input to. That's what I have.
Any questions for board improvement and policy? Hearing none, let's move on to curriculum and instruction. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Deroni?
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but at the PTA council meeting that I attended, there was a lot of discussion about donations and our policy on donations. And in one particularly hard spot, I said, I think the policy committee should look at that. So I think they had some really serious unworkable situations where they were informed that all gifts to the district have to come to the board for approval, and they were like, you mean everything, like the $100 gift for every teacher to buy supplies, and the erasers for the break room, and all the little things that they do under the policy as it was quoted to them. They need to get board approval for that. And, we kind of agreed that's pretty unworkable. So I suggested the policy committee take a look at that and try and come up with something that PTAs could actually operate under.
Yeah, there's two issues. One, we rolled out a guideline for donations that are going to affect our facilities, both if it's inside or outside. If we're going to change the infrastructure of our facilities, there's a guideline now that we're asking all donations to go through before they even get to the fundraising stage. So if we want to put up a garden, a gazebo, whatever, there's a process now that they have to go through to get district approval in order to have that facility put in. That's one. Two, there has always been, it's an urban legend again, that if a donation was less than $500, they did not have to go to the Board of Education, and lots of groups, including the PTA, was operating under that understanding. When we reviewed the policy, that doesn't exist. There is no $500 or less limit on this. So we're going to take it back to policy and consider that because, again, the PTA, as Susan said, kind of freaked and said, well, we give, $5, $10 to teachers, and do we really have to go through? And I don't think that's the intention of the board. But again, we'll discuss it at committee level and then bring it back to the full board for further discussion. But at least a starting point there, back to committee.
Now, curriculum and instruction.
Okay, first we discussed our English Learner Program. I've talked about this before. Our English Learner Program continues to grow, and 2 programs were put in place to work towards compliance with state rules and regulations, transitional bilingual education, and transitional program and instruction. So these 2 programs bring us towards compliance, and beyond these state regulations, there are a lot of other considerations that the committee is reviewing, and it's going to be a long-term process. What our end goal is we want to have a workshop discussion here at the board table, and that's going to take a few months before that's going to happen. We're going to take the next 2 committee meetings and discuss research and best practices. We're going to take a look at one of the ELL books that our administrators are suggesting. So we're going to take a look at some of the underlying considerations for English learners, talk to our community, and then prep or have a really good workshop discussion here at the board table. So that will probably be December, maybe January, sometime in that time frame. And that was another thing I wanted to talk about. Because of this committee, the community will notice a change in our board meetings. We're working towards having true workshop meetings, which hasn't been done a lot in the past. So we're working towards having a business meeting once a month and then a workshop meeting where we can really dive into a subject and come to consensus, and everyone's very well prepared for the discussion. So that takes a lot of prep work, which can be done in the committee to have these really robust workshop discussions. Okay, the next thing we talked about was we have key district performance indicators for curriculum and instruction. We talked about these at our last board meeting. There are 9 of these key district performance indicators. And what we're going to see at the next board meeting, September 25th, we're going to see baseline data for each of those 9 indicators. So at our committee meeting, we reviewed the baseline data, and there's still a lot of discussion to be had there. We need to have a target for AP participation, so we really didn't make any recommendations yet. We need to talk about it again in the committee, and we'll talk about it at the full board table too. So that's going to be ongoing. We also reviewed an annual work plan. We agreed on 4 main initiatives for our committee. One of the initiatives is called SCALE. This is an acronym: Standards, Curriculum, Assessment, Instruction, and Learner. And another initiative is Professional Learning Communities. 3rd, District Performance Indicators. And 4th, the English Learner Program. So those are going to be our main topics of conversation for the upcoming year. That's it.
Any questions for Mrs. Ebner? Hearing none. Finance and Operations, Mr. Bloom.
I think fortunately we managed to take most of the topics and already cover them, but I will try to be brief. In the Finance Committee meeting that we had on August 21st, the first item we reviewed July monthly financial reports. This happened right after the previous week's board meeting on budget, so I think the message that Chris had for us was that everything was right in line, but it was the first month of the year. Chris, do you know I was just flipping through here and trying to get to, typically we'll post that. Have those July financials been posted to the bigger board doc? I mean, usually there's a set of these that have a bunch of detailed spreadsheets and check registers and that kind of stuff.
Yes, those, the July were at the,
That was already, we've already
Yes.
covered those.
yes.
Right, okay, good. B, the second item was the donations by PTAs for landscaping projects. I think Dave covered where we are on that. The third item was beverage contract. I think the Pepsi has significantly raised the prices that they're charging us on beverages, so Chris would like to competitively bid that contract, which he will be doing later in the year, and he'll be bringing that back to the board to discuss. We talked about facilities usage. I think we're in the process of trying to put a date on the calendar to have our users back together now that the school year has started and that the reservation process has run its course, to talk both about the new fee structure, but then also about how that reservation process worked, how committing times and divvying up space is working, and so I look forward to having that on the calendar soon. And then within the status update section, there's a facilities at a glance document that we're working on. I think Chris and Frank had presented a draft shell, which we had asked them, let's talk about format and let's see if this works for us. And we're in the process of giving feedback to them on the format. And then the next step would be for them to then start to fill it with content and bring it to the board for discussion. But, again, to the point earlier, this is, from a committee standpoint, it's an opportunity for the administration to work with us on getting the content in the shell and bounce ideas off of us on how to present information. And then ultimately, this information will be presented to the entire board. So it's a process that, hopefully by having this committee, it speeds up the process of getting this complete and then eventually out to the public. And the last piece was committees, which we covered. So any questions?
I have one. Could you just make sure that the Finance Committee is on a timeline to have the proper resolutions brought to the board, so we're set up for a January timeframe, should market conditions exist to refinance a good portion of our debt? That, at least the portion that is refinanceable.
Absolutely. And Chris, can you, I think it might be worth pinging William Blair and having him rerun some numbers, and bringing back options, I think, to kick around. And I think the question is, we had talked about doing this in a bank qualified method, a step at a time. I think rates are where they are. I think the other option would be to just do everything in January. So, I think if we could have that discussion, or at least have her run that, and then we can bring that to the board, that would be great. Actually, there's one other question, Karen. In the Lend update that you sent, there was one of the policy accomplishments was changing some law around the amount of bonds that can be refunded. And I don't know what it was, but it was about anything issued after November of 2000 or something. So I don't know. I'd have to open it up to look at it. But I didn't know if there was a recent change in state law that would allow you to either refund bonds multiple times, whereas you might not have before. And Chris, maybe that's a question you can ask William Blair as to whether there have been any changes in legislation that have opened up the window for more bonds that we might not otherwise have been able to consider.
Thank you. Next is the Performance Management Committee. Mrs. Hirsch.
Let's see, the committee met August 27th. There were just a couple of items on our agenda first and probably most critical to the administration and to all of our building principals is that the state has implemented a new principal evaluation program for this school year. So our building principals at all levels have a component of their personal performance evaluation is going to be tied to student academic growth, the students in their building. The challenge in implementing this that the administration has been faced with is that we must, all of these goals must be set by October 1st, and all the principal evaluations must be completed by March 1st. And so we're really, the administration has communicated to us that there's a great challenge in trying to find authentic student growth numbers, given the time restraints, and this is tricky to figure out. It's also very different if you can imagine early childhood and trying to come up with a way to measure academic growth versus at the high school. So it's been challenging, but we will be all set to have those goals set by October 1st. It's been a significant amount of time for all of our staff to get up to speed for performance evaluations for our teachers as well. But we're working on it, making progress. We spent some time talking about the superintendent's goals for the year and are moving to have the superintendent's goals aligned with the key district performance indicators that we've been talking about. We're looking at measuring the effectiveness overall of the district, and that's what we're going to be setting with the superintendent, his goals to be focused on. We also are looking ahead at the superintendent's evaluation process, what went well this year and what we might need to take into consideration next year. There was a little bit of duplication, I think, in the 360 assessment that Mr. Pernot offered to the board, as well as all of the people that he works with. And so we'll be eliminating the board response on the 360, but each of the administrators still have asked the people that they work with on a daily basis for feedback on their performance and how they work well together. We also had some discussions about the superintendent's performance evaluation, and we're not ready to make a recommendation yet, but we had talked about the fact that the time frame for the superintendent's evaluation is pretty much the end of the year and over the summer. And as Mr. Collins or Mrs. Deroney or somebody earlier this evening said, there could be a new makeup of board sitting at the table. And so we discussed options in terms of current sitting board members providing some feedback to the superintendent on our experiences working with him this year. And just taking that into consideration so that the new board can be up and running and provide a good performance evaluation and a fair one for the superintendent. We're also looking at the structure and approach that the board would like to take with administration compensation and the structure of contracts. So we're starting some of those early discussions to come up with discussion points and ways that we can frame the conversation for the full board in a future meeting. And then really the district performance indicators that we've been talking about for a year, a number of them are based on responses from our students, from our faculty, and from our parents. And so Mr. Pernot is planning right now to implement the Harris survey, which is going to give us input and feedback on a number of areas across all of our district performance indicators. But we're working together to put that plan to bring that back to the full board, making progress on that. Any questions?
Okay. Next is the superintendent's consent agenda. Do I hear? Go ahead, Mrs. Hirsch.
I move that we approve the superintendent's consent agenda items A through E.
I second the motion.
One item I would like to point out before the board votes on the item. If you look under Fisher, Conrad Fisher, they have two donations tonight. One is for $3,000 from an anonymous donor who wishes to remain anonymous. But I think it's of note, and I want to let the board know. This anonymous donor is a parent in the district whose children attend other buildings in the district. They don't attend Fisher. But the donor felt that in the sake of equity and looking at the building needs and school needs across the district, there was a need to donate to Fisher rather than homeschool, rather than the traditional donation to your child's home school. And I think that speaks volumes of the kind of thing that I think is going on. And hopefully, we've had some donations to Fisher. And I think it just speaks of this community and that community awareness that they're all of our students, they're all of our children, and we need to educate them all kind of with equity and with care. And I think this anonymous donor really understands that. And luckily, it's also a matching corporate donation, too. So Fisher's going to come away with $6,000 because of that. And just something of note that I wanted it not to slip by the board or the public to note that. So,
Thank you. So moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Stufen. Mrs. Ebner, you'll get the next tie called in your favor. This requires a roll call vote.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner? Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough is absent. Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. 6 ayes, no nays, 1 absent. The motion carries. The next thing on our agenda is a review of upcoming meetings. And as has been pointed out tonight, we have enough of them. Tuesday, September 18th, the Finance and Operations Committee will meet at 6:30 p.m. in this building. Thursday, September 20th, the Performance Management Committee will meet at 7 p.m. in this building. Tuesday, September 25th, is the regular Board of Education meeting at 7:30 p.m. in this room. Thursday, September 27th, is the Board Improvement and Policy Committee meeting at 7 p.m. in this building. And Wednesday, October 3rd, is the Curriculum and Instruction Committee meeting at 7 p.m. In this building. And the next thing on our agenda is board communications. And Mrs. Stufen, you had something to.
Thank you. At the last Board Improvement Policy Committee meeting, we talked about the legislative engagement by the board. And as you heard from my update, we talked about the plan several meetings ago. We really wanted to provide all board members an opportunity to discuss what should our goal or goals be as we embark upon this legislative engagement plan and process. So what you have is some of our ideas, and we thought it would be helpful for you to have an opportunity to either say you like them or add something, but we thought that we should really kind of at least get your input as we tweak and fine-tune it. Is that good?
That's great. Thank you. Anything else? Go ahead.
I was just going to add the time frame. I mean, what we're trying to do is get all of our planning up front, committee and full board, and a little bit of communication to the public prior to the elections in November, so that we have the plan that can start being executed, with the new legislators. The time frame.
Thank you. I have one thing to add. I was contacted by the District 205 Foundation that was looking to meet with some of us before their meeting on Wednesday, the 3rd, or was it the 5th of September?
Wednesday's
The 3rd of September, okay. And, I told them that any meeting with more than 2 of us, we would have to post. And they felt it was important to meet before their board meeting. So Mrs. Ebner and I, given that Mrs. Ebner is the board point person on STEM, met with a few of their members, and then they asked me to come talk to their board meeting on September 3rd. So the essence of what they would like to achieve is to work more closely with the Board of Education, which personally I think is a great idea. They'd like to kick it off by having a meeting with us that might be more social and getting to know you in nature. And so I'll ask Ellen Walsh to survey the board in terms of availability dates, if you're interested in meeting with the foundation and having the foundation board in an effort to kind of start to build a foundation to work more closely with between the Board of Education and the foundation board. They would prefer to do this before their midnight masquerade on the 20th of October. So that'll be our time frame, sometime between now and the 20th of October, to try to get together with their board, and then we'll see where that takes us from there. So I just wanted to communicate that to everyone. Any, Mrs. Deroni?
So this will be a social meeting where we're not going to talk district business, just to get to know each other as people, or is it going to be a board meeting?
The idea is that we start out people to people, getting to know one another, and then in future meetings, we can discuss more business. But, I also recommend that they are going to devote their midnight masquerade fundraising to these NOVA units that we're implementing in the middle school science curriculum. Their board meeting occurs at the exact same time as the curriculum and instruction board meeting. I would recommend that, I've just been talking to them and talking to Kathleen Wilkie, that maybe we take a half an hour out of their board meeting and our curriculum and instruction meeting, call it a committee of the whole meeting, and just let Mrs. Wilkie go through how these NOVA units fit in the curriculum, what they do, why they're there, so that both the Foundation Board and the Board of Education is well-versed in the device that the Foundation is going to spend quite a bit of time and effort fundraising for, so that we can include these units in our curriculum. That's all I had.
Move to adjourn.
Do I hear a second? Come on, there we go. Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Ebner. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.